Let's get started. So welcome everyone and thank you for joining us on your lunch hour. My name is Brandon Hall and I'm the Director of Marketing at Ontario Equestrian, and I'll be moderating today's session. And before we dive deep into the advances in Sporthorse Performance Longevity, presented of course in partnership with our friends at Haygain Canada, we ask that all questions during the presentation be typed in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, just to the right of your share screen area. We're going to be pretty casual with the format today. So our speakers will be checking the Q&A box throughout the duration of the presentation and answering your questions as they go. As a reminder, this session is going to be recorded. It's currently being recorded and will be shared tomorrow on OE's social media channels, as well as, I believe, Haygain's as well. So without further ado, I am very excited to introduce Kim Miller, who is Haygain's content ambassador, and ambassador liaison, who will be leading today's session and introducing our two very special guests, Sean Jobin and Dr. Tim Warden. Over to you, Kim.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, Brendan gave you my official title, and my unofficial title is the most fun at Haygain, because I spend all of my time talking to and writing content around horse owners that use Haygain's products, whether it's our high temperature steamed hay or our conversed flooring or the forager slow feeder. So it's just really great to be in that position, and that's where I got to know Sean and Tim. I believe that you reached out to us about a year ago, and I knew right away that your inquiry was a bit different. You wanted to know what kind of research was existing, supporting the benefits of steamed hay, and the intensity and the depth of your question let me know that you guys are really serious about evidence-based approaches, and that evidence-based in the nutrition context was a small piece of a much bigger picture, that you're really at the cutting edge of things that we see happening with elite human performance in terms of data analytics and using those to help your horse both perform better and be more comfortable. And as Tim told me, the whole idea of it is to really light a fire in the horse that comes from feeling great in his body and in his mind, and feeling capable and confident of doing what you've asked him to do. So we just knew that when we had a chance to do an educational webinar, that these were the right guys to turn to, and we appreciate Tim and Sean being making your time available. So just very in brief, Dr. Tim Warden has a PhD in biomechanics from the University of Guelph, and he's a real sports science expert, has been working with several FEI riders in addition to Sean, including Team Canada riders. And he plays an important position with two very forward-thinking organizations in horse sport, which is the Sporthorse Research Foundation and the Equine High Performance Group, which are all sort of doing what Tim and Sean are doing and trying to harness science for the good of the horse and their well-being. And then Sean is just a really wonderful rising star on the show jumping circuit. This is his top horse, Darius, that we're seeing a picture of. And Sean is super passionate about employing all these analytical and everything, every tool you can get on your side to help the horses be comfortable and excel. And I think another common denominator is looking for horses a little bit beyond the more obvious realm, like not just how much money do I have, but being able to use these tools to identify potential in horses and then bring it out, which that makes the topic very applicable to all of us regular riders with regular horses and stuff. So anyway, so just to get started with our questions, I wanted to first have Tim and Sean explain, how did you two meet and how did you come to know this common interest that you had?
For sure. Thanks, Kim, and thanks, Brandon, for setting this up. So I think we met back in 2016, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but it was at a U25 presentation, right?
Yeah, it was Beth Underhill was organizing them. Yeah.
So
she'd organized a couple, but I think that was the first one.
Yeah. So so I came in, and Beth Underhill, who I believe is another Haygain rider, very influential here in Canada. For the U25 riders, she had organized an in-person meeting. And I think Amy Miller talked for the first half hour, and then I talked for the second half hour. And I was talking about what I had done up until that point with trying to better understand what made jumping horses tick, essentially. So the analyses that I had done, looking at where they're having faults, using some high-speed video, just looking at every metric. And I think at the end of the day, I'm not a very original person. I'm pretty much just stealing everything I can from human sports science and then just throwing it at the horse world and kind of seeing what sticks. And yeah, that was the presentation. And Sean and I started talking soon after that. And as you said, Kim, there's a lot of synergy in how we see the sport, I think. And it really is about this athlete comes across your radar, it comes into your stable, and you now have access to this athlete, and how do you make it the best athlete it can be? So both in terms of enhancing performance, but as well, how do you make sure it stays sound? And anything you wanted to add to that, Sean?
Yeah, I thought like I was really interested, especially then, because I think, 2016 is a long time ago now. But I was always really, really interested in like analytics on like other sports sides, like in other sports as I watch and everything. And I was always kind of sitting down thinking, wow, man, I really wish like I could find a way to incorporate this some way into horse sport, but the funny thing was no one was really talking about it. So when Tim kind of got up and did his presentation, I was like, man, like I literally never heard anybody talk about an actual plan for integrating some of these systems and this knowledge into show jumping. So I think that was really cool for me.
Great. Awesome. Okay, well, next up, can you give us a real specific example of a method of analyzing performance and then how you use that to incorporate into your training to address whatever the issue is? And I think we've got a video here, Slo-Mo video.
So yeah, I'll maybe kick this off. So like the one thing that I'm a big fan of is high-speed video. And the reason it's called high-speed video is that a regular video camera usually takes 30 to 60 like pictures a second. And then when you lump them all together, when you combine them all, you get your video, right? But what a high-speed video camera does, it can take 120 pictures a second up to 240 or however high you want it to go, essentially. So it actually takes a lot more pictures of a movement for a given amount of time. So it allows you to see a lot more about the horse, I think. And this is something that Sean and I have used a lot. So like this is his horse Darius in Ocala, and maybe Hillary, if you can play it back through when it ends, and just keep playing it until I stop talking. But it's really nice because I think it allows you to see a lot of stuff. It allows you to see and really appreciate how hard these horses really do try. You can see over the B element of this combination just how much Darius stretches, and it really demonstrates how smart he is. Like as soon as he leaves the ground, he knows this is going to be a big effort and he needs to really stretch to get across it. You can use it to look for if a horse is pushing off asymmetrically, which Darius isn't. But if a horse was really drifting through a combination, you'd be able to see that. You can watch the rider. Are they keeping the horse in balance or are they putting it off balance? You can look to see, like, is the horse setting the correct takeoff angle or is it jumping too flat or too high? So all of that stuff is really useful with something like high-speed video, for example. Anything you want to add to that, Sean?
Yeah, no, I remember this class in particular. It was a $200,000 class, if I'm not mistaken, down in HITS. But I remember like this combination right here, it's so difficult. I think especially as a rider too, because you got two pretty big oxers. It's one stride, and then we just got one stride coming out too, right? Or is that two stride there? No, so it's a one stride oxer, and I think the vertical on the backside is a little bit like you don't even care about that at some point, because those two oxers require just so much work on your horse's part, and it happens so fast too. Like your perception of how the horse jumped and how everything went is just so completely different than all the mechanics of the horse actually moving. Like it always shocks me to see how much Darius really gets involved with that front end there. And it seems to really help him with the oxers too. And it's little stuff too about like my own ride. Like I'm just seeing right here, like putting a lot of extra weight into that left stirrup. I was probably trying to keep him in the center a little bit there. Maybe he was trying to drift away from the gazebo in the middle. But I think this kind of stuff is really, really big, because that this just becomes a whole wash in your mind, especially right after the class, and especially when you watch it like in high speed. It's you're in and you're out and you don't even remember what happened, so.
And I think it's really valuable to try to piece together all the pieces, right? Like Sean, you are spending months and months preparing for these types of classes, and then it's really the test. It's how does it come together, and not just the mechanical, but also like, does the horse have the mental skills to really figure it out? Which I think, like when you watch how Darius goes through, like it's clear that he reads everything well. It's not like anything caught him off guard. He didn't really know where the back rail was over this ox. And also, like, does he have the motivation to do it? Like, is he going to stretch that extra little bit, and is he going to push as much as he needs to? Does he have that intrinsic motivation to go through? So it's like these types of tools are really interesting. And then as well, if you are looking at like Sean's over in Europe right now looking at horses, and again, like, it's very valuable in those situations. You can jump different horses through a similar combination and look to see like which horses really seem to have that mental understanding of the test you're asking of them, and which ones jump really, really well, like mechanically they're naturally gifted, or which ones are maybe at a lower price point, but you look at them and you say, like, yeah, they're at a lower price point, but they're actually reading it quite well, and maybe they're just not strong enough yet. And is that something we can put a little bit of strength into them, or a little bit of explosiveness, and convert them from maybe a meter 40 horse now, but into something that is quite competitive at FEI in 6 months or a year. Perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Hillary, I think there's another slide, because we kind of addressed the next question, which was how do you use this evidence you get to find talented horses, which is great. We covered that, but let's talk about this data sheet that you've maintained over a whole season for Darius.
Yeah, so this right, yeah, so I think it's cut off a little bit, because on the left side, or I might have just sent from 2021, but it usually will also have like the dates and everything. And what I've started doing is spacing them out, so I know like how many weeks the horse had off in between the competitions. So this is kind of one of the first, I think it was probably one of the first years I started using just a basic spreadsheet. And this idea came from Tim, and I know a lot of other top riders do this as well. But I think it's really useful, because it's really easy. Anybody can do it. You don't need like a high-speed camera. You don't need any tech to wear on the horse or anything crazy. You just need an Excel spreadsheet, right? And I think it's something like that, as far as a training program goes, it gets forgotten about a little bit. Like, I think a lot of really top programs have a good record of competition results and just the little details that happen in competition, right? Because I think that the devil is in the details with the trends that show up over like a long year. So I think in this one right here, like as far as information to kind of glean out of it, I didn't know, like, obviously you see like on the right side of context, like an endemic problem of Darius is just constantly just coming in too fast. Like, this is how, like, on the right side of the context, I would just, kind of write a quick blurb of how I felt personally, what happened when I had that rail or something. And it's just always like, I really just felt way too flat and fast. And I felt like the horse was really too low to the ground. And every time I had that rail, we just couldn't get the angle right. I never felt like a lot of these issues were like pure strength issues, or more like dexterity issues, and then there's odd rails here and there where it's like, okay, like I think, a horse spooked, okay, I didn't prep enough that day, or there's cross cantering. I thought was another trend that kind of developed over a little while. I think that's something, especially when we're going really fast in the bigger classes, cross cantering sort of gets like a little bit, you're like, yeah, whatever, especially if you got kind of a hot horse, you're like, you don't really worry about too much. But then you realize, like, okay, like if I'm having a rail, like maybe not when I'm cross cantering, but like right after I cross canter or something like that, like the jump after, like I'm kind of like getting my horse really strung out or really unfocused by not getting this lead change done proper and good, or not getting them nice and balanced and flexing up. Maybe I need to stop and take a second and really make sure I hammer out those, those leads and not just kind of throw it and keep going with speed. So it's, it's all little stuff, right? And then I think too with combinations, I think combinations are so difficult too, right? That's usually, if you look at like any top Grand Prix, that's where most of the rails are coming down to, in combination. So keeping track of just what kind of combination it was and, where the rail happened in it, then you can go back at home and, just practice that combination a few times and get it better and just sort of workshop it. And, yeah.
It seems like a lot of these challenges that you've made in the context column, you would address them on the flat, right? It's about control and
Exactly. And I think like a lot of the times, like when you have a rail, you kind of know what happened, like before, but I think it's especially useful just for the trends in the long term to see where things are kind of leading and what your program is kind of developing out of your horse, right?
Right. That's great. Okay, well, jumping over to nutrition and respiratory health, as I said earlier, you guys approached me with a bunch of questions about Haygain and what was the science behind it. So can you talk about what were the things you were most interested in to know about the science behind Haygain steamed hay, and then how has that manifested now that Darius and a few other horses have been having steamed hay for about 6 months or so? What evidence are you seeing?
So I think for me, like I think it was actually at an equine high performance sports group meeting a couple of years ago where Haygain had a sales rep there, and yeah, I remember at dinner one evening, I was sitting with them, and at that point had heard a little, or they were telling me a little bit about some of the research that had been done, and I was really interested about it. So I went back and looked at it, and I thought this would be a perfect product for horses, for a lot of horses, but especially if there was a situation that came up where horses may be struggling with breathing a little bit or some allergies, having a system that is really able to attenuate the mold that is just inherently present in hay, right? And some of that bacteria that's just, it's nothing that was done wrong on anyone's part, like from the farmer to how it was stored or anything. It's just a byproduct of using hay. It's just there. Yeah. So having something available that is able to target that, to keep the dust down, and to address all of these things is really valuable. And then obviously Sean had some horses that we thought would be definitely interesting to explore, and that was really the genesis. And I'll throw it over to you now, Sean.
Yeah, I think we've been working together for a while, and we've done a lot of work in a bunch of areas, like in heart rate and speed tracking, like the biometrics, but we hadn't really got too heavy into nutrition. And so I know Tim told me, it's like, hey, listen, Haygain, at the end of the day, this is, a system that has a lot of research behind it. It's got a lot of empirical evidence backing it up. And then we're also at that point realizing, Darius is, he's having some allergy issues, which weren't really affecting his performance. But I think, going back to the general philosophy of just trying to keep the horse as happy and as comfortable as possible all the time, treat him like a rock star, I think we really wanted to just get on top of that and make sure when he's going to show he's not uncomfortable, especially if he's getting different types of hay, or especially if the climate's kind of affecting the pollen or the dust or anything else in the hay. So that's what really drew me over the Haygain system.
Great. Is in the same nutrition general category, as a horse owner, there's like so many claims about what products do. And I'm just wondering, do you guys have any advice for us on differentiating what to claim versus what is an actually proven piece of evidence?
Yeah, for sure. Like I know personally, I'm probably a bit of an outlier, but every week I do just a quick search of what was published in the last week in the equine realm, right? And you look to see what's come out that was a little bit more controlled and has some nice evidence behind it. And like that's kind of the area that Haygain falls in, right? If you search Haygain, it's been published in PLOS One, I think a couple of veterinary journals. And so you know that at least it went through a peer review process and there was some control with the way the research was set up, and it was at least like the rationale for the research and like the results somewhat at the very least somewhat makes sense. And at most time, if the researchers did their job and the reviewers at those journals did their jobs, then you can look at that and be pretty confident that in many different situations and scenarios, you'd get the same effect from a product. I think sometimes the challenge becomes it's very expensive to do research, especially with horses. You have to maintain these horses. You need to pay for grad students and researchers to do the research. It becomes hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a lot of research. So oftentimes you get products popping up that they're taking some research and then trying to translate it. So they maybe found something in petri dishes, so in vitro research, so it's much cheaper to do that, and then you make the jump and you say like maybe it'll work the exact same in a living animal, and sometimes those products do, but also there are other times when they don't. So it's really about just what's the person's comfort level and how confident do they want to be with those claims. And I think for me, just the way I look at the world, if I don't have a really good reason for using something, then it gets thrown away for me. If I can't like very confidently go and defend my decision to use something, then I'd rather invest that money in something else that I feel more comfortable with. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, Kim, but that's kind of my recommendation, is to try to go through and to take a bit of a critical look at it. And I'm not saying that products that don't have research also don't, like that they automatically don't work, but it's one extra thing that I can sleep a little bit better at night knowing that, it's been through this rigorous process and there's something that came out on the other side that makes a lot of sense in our program. And it seems to work well with the horses. They've responded well. So if it ticks those boxes, then it gets to stay in the program. And if something doesn't tick those boxes, then I think I'm always just a bit more critical, and it's less likely to stick in our program.
Right. And I do feel like we average horse owners, there's so much scientific information online, so many science journals that are online, and it's a little bit wonky at first to kind of read through and understand how they're substantiated. But if you invest some time in it, there's a wealth of great information out there. So it's worth doing. So great.
For sure.
Sean,
and I think,
or go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add, and I think as well, just there's a lot to be said for having a network that you trust and that you're able to communicate with. Like I think veterinarians are really good resources on certain topics. Farriers can be really good resources. Whoever your mentors are can also be really good resources. It's about like trying not to do everything in isolation as well. I'm constantly on the phone and constantly on Zoom calls with different people, just trying to pick their brains. So I think the more people the more ideas you bring in, the more information you bring in, it again just makes it that much more likely that you're making the correct decisions.
Right. Sean, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd agree with everything there. I think a lot of times the challenge can actually end up being just how to keep things simple, because in a way there's so many products actually available right now and so many things you can do, and there's so many different training programs with a million different variables, right? I think and it's just easy to get overwhelmed and maybe overwhelm the horses too, with a whole bunch of different conflicting I guess technologies in a way, whether it's supplements or whether it's different hay or different feeding programs or anything. So I think honestly, like a lot of the best training programs I've seen it's really amazing how simple a lot of them are too, right? And I guess in a way it makes sense because the horses are pretty simple, right? Like their diets are pretty simple, and yeah.
Great. We've got a good question here. We have a few good questions, but this one is real germane to this topic, which, Tim, they're asking, how do you stay on top of equine research? Are there specific newsletters, search terms, journals, or other information sources that you routinely track?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that there are a few resources. Being Canadian and from Ontario, obviously, University of Guelph equine program does put out some newsletters and some content that I think can be quite valuable. And I think a lot of vet colleges, equine vet colleges, do something similar. I would encourage you to check out the Sporthorse Research Foundation as a resource. More and more, we're starting to put out content like through the social media channels there, and as well as the Equine High Performance Sports Group. Like that's another place where we're trying to put out information that may be valuable. But I think in general, there aren't great resources the same way there are on the human side, but it's something that I think that there's more and more appetite for. And it's for sure something like through some different organizations that we're looking at, like how to streamline that a little bit and to highlight some like really cool research coming out, because like there for sure is some great research. It's just a lot of times stuff gets published in journals and it never really gets translated and shared to the broader world. So it's you've definitely highlighted a bit of a need in the world, but we're slowly working on it. I'm hoping by next year there'll be some improvements in that.
Yeah, great. Tim, you have talked about the importance of monitoring the horse's battery levels from a physical and a physiological and an emotional standpoint. Can you talk about what that means and how you monitor those aspects?
Yeah, so it's again like an idea that comes from the human side, but I think it's very, very relevant to what we do in our world. So if you think about the way a battery works, right? When it's at full charge, you get a really good output from it. But as you pull from that battery, it drains over time and you're going to have to do something to recharge it, right? And I think you can look at an athlete as having many different batteries. Obviously, there's the physiological one, which I think people always think about the most, is that, does it have the athletic potential to go and do the job that it needs to do? And that's looking at things like, is the muscle firing correctly? Is the movement correct mechanically? But then there's also the mental side of things. Does the horse have the awareness and the thinking processing capacity to do the tasks that we're asking it to do? And if you ask a horse a question, does it answer the right way? And then the emotional is more so like, does it want to do, does it have that inherent like desire to do what it needs to do, or does it not really feel that way? And all that to say that it's so important with athletes to make sure that they're always feeling good. You're not really going to accomplish much in training or in competition if that battery is drained. That's just the way it is. If you have an athlete who's not motivated to do what you're asking them, or if the body's not ready to do what you're going to ask of it, then you're going to get a bad output. Like that's the only way. So I think when we look at training and we look at writing programs, it really does come down to putting those horses in the best possible position. So that if you showed 2 or 3 days over the weekend, then the horse is going to need a bit more time to recover. And you may need to introduce some therapeutic inputs to make sure it's feeling good the next time. And then similarly, if a horse has been through a stressful situation, back when I was tracking Team Canada horses, there were some horses that really struggled with travel, or that really struggled with a veterinarian visit, or didn't like the farrier, for example, and they would actually be drained for 2 days after. So it's something to be aware of, because you almost need to think back and to reflect back on that, and to say, like, 2 days after the farrier comes, like that horse just needs to recover. So any flat work that's done maybe just needs to be light, just to give it a chance to pop back up. And then like one way to do that, and that's what a little bit this video is showing, is to compare your horse when it's progressed versus in its current state. So like, is the horse moving well? So like, is that physiological battery recovered? Is the muscle firing the way it should? Are you happy with that movement? So for me, I'm much happier with the movement on the right for this horse than the left. And the left is a lot earlier in its career. It's a really nice 4-year-old. but you can see on the right that the hind end is a lot more accepting of the weight, so it doesn't collapse as much. It carries its body a lot higher. So like just looking at this, I'd feel confident saying like this horse's batteries are close to recharged. Like it looks more explosive. It looks happy. It looks ready to do what we're going to ask of it. So it really comes down to just making sure in your own training program that you're always mindful of if I did a really hard workout, like the body may be tired, the mind may be tired, like emotionally it may just not be ready to go, and to always adjust based on that. Never put your horse in a position where the battery is drained and you're going to go ask more of it, because that's pretty much a guaranteed recipe for injury or overtraining, or for the horse just to, not want to do its job that day.
Right. Great. Sean, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just I agree with Tim. At the end of the day, it's like what we're doing with training is we're always pushing the horse to a bit of the limit and then a little past the limit, right? And fundamentally what it is doing when we're growing muscle is we are, causing tears in the muscle and we're breaking it down. And I think it's just important to just remember that, like what we're actually doing to the horse's body. And I think when you hit the gym and you work really hard, and like you as a human know exactly how you're feeling a few days after that, like in the last 2-3 days for sure, of just being like absolutely crushed, right? So I think keeping that in mind, and I think just seeing from a lot of I know we were talking about like track and field programs, like Charlie Francis's old programs and stuff like that, like how much emphasis those real top programs put on recovery, like rest and recovery. And because I think a lot of times too, like training is it's fun, and especially when you're pushing and you're getting bigger and stronger and everything, it's fun. It's easy to kind of get caught up in that and keep pushing, and then forgetting that this is really taking a wear on the horse's body, and it's something that can get lost in the mix because we're not necessarily feeling that.
Right. Okay. I want to skip over the next question about do you do one change at a time, because this next slide to me is more interesting. So it's what aspects of horse health and performance do you monitor, and how do you monitor them? And some of that is wearable devices. So can you tell us what this is and how you interpret it? And
yeah, so this is a wearable device. It's called the Move Pro. We actually just got it a couple weeks ago. We've used other wearable devices before, and I've always really liked them. So what the Move Pro does is it was developed in conjunction with like the Utrecht University stuff, the biomechanic research, right? So like
the Move Pro, I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure.
I can't remember exactly how much it was using, but I do know that they had some kind of partnership there. But what it mostly tracks, it's a small device. It's about the size of like a smartphone. It just goes like on the stud guard of a horse's girth, and what it tracks is like balance in the horse, where you're going. It tracks stride length, stride consistency. It actually tracks, like it's a little bit overwhelming because there's so many analytics it tracks here.
How does it track balance in the horse? How does it determine that?
So just because I guess it tips, right? Like with the horse, it figures out like a standard deviation of that particular horse, right? And then by the way it's tipping, by the way the horse is maybe leaning left and forward, it can sense that it's where the horse is going, especially with the consistency of the stride taken into account. So I really like a couple of things. I like the strike power. That's probably the most interesting thing for me personally, because we don't have a lot of analytics to actually track that. So that's all really new stuff there. I think the lateral balance, all that stuff is great too. And then just the jump angles, I think is massive for us too. Because I think like as a show jumping rider, this is just my kind of personal take on it. I think a lot of the times we kind of get too caught up in scope and like issues of scope and think like, when you're coming down that big oxer on course and like say it's a meter 55 or something, and it's really wide and square, I think a lot of times the emphasis gets on, is my horse strong and powerful enough, and can he just get the raw strength to get over this big fence? But I think a lot of the times what it even comes down to more is the angle you're taking onto the fence. Like, because if you get like really underneath that oxer, and just riding some really, really great horses, that they can figure a way out of that stuff like really efficiently, that other horses maybe struggle at. And I think a lot of that is how well they can change their jump angle, or how well they can figure their way out of different takeoff angles to the fences there, and then use their athletic ability to help them out. So I think tracking that sort of stuff too, and a horse's progression in developing its angles and everything is pretty interesting here. But it's all very new stuff. Like, we don't really have there's nothing in here that's going to say, okay, like here's a magic button and like you need to do this with the horse, you need that. It's a lot of data, and like at the end of the day, the data needs to be interpreted. So I think that's the next kind of step here is just collecting enough of this data over enough horses and over a long enough period of time, and then using it and interpreting it, right?
Yeah. Sean, on the category that says gait split analysis, am I reading that right? That during your one ride, you spent 42 minutes walking? And
yeah, so that was, I forgot to turn it off.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, because I also do a ton of walking with the horses too, like before and after, especially the pre-horses. So it's not like that isn't that surprising to me, but it's probably not quite that much. I did forget to turn it on. Like, this was my first jumping with the system. So, but I tried to do like a lot of walking just to the stretch and warm up beforehand, and then a ton of walking after the jumping as well too, because at the end of the day, I think stretching is huge for any athlete. You need to make sure that you stretch out before and after, and you need to make sure any lactic acid that gets built up in the muscle cells and anything, it gets flushed out, and the blood gets moving back into the tendons and all the muscles and everything, so that some recovery can take place. And I think walking is it's just a tried and true way of getting all that to work. So.
But it's not just like walking, like it's a working walk probably, and having him stretch his neck down and stuff. It's an active walk, I would think.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. What about for us regular riders, more low tech monitoring devices that we can use? Like if we have video from around at a show, watching it in slow motion, like what are just a few things that we can look for and then apply to our training?
Yeah, so I think that it's almost an infinite amount of information you can almost look at, right? Like, I think that the one thing that I wish everyone would do, and I'll tell you that pretty much every professional athlete is doing it, like whether it's handwritten or some other way of collecting it, is just having a journal. Like keeping a journal of what the horse did that day, how it felt that day, did it eat well, did it drink well, all of that information. Like I've done some work with a company on the human side, and a lot of like the NFL, NBA, MLB teams, they all use this platform, and it brings in as much data as possible for your LeBron Jameses and your Steph Currys and your Tom Brady's and everything, right? And like what they show is that like there's for sure really complex data you can bring in from movement analysis and GPS sensors and all of this stuff, but a lot of times the most important data that they bring in is just something that someone fills out every morning when they wake up. Like, how did you sleep? Do you feel rested today? Like, does your body have any soreness? And if you're looking at like what correlates for professional sports athletes to their performance later that day or in the future, it's typically like things like sleep score and like just their own perception of how their body feels. So I think if you're tracking that alone in a journal, it's incredibly valuable. So like once you've done that for a month or two, you can start to go back and you can look at, I had a really good competition last weekend. So let's look at, the 4 weeks leading up to that, because whatever your output was in a competition, like it's for sure like relates back to what you did the day before, but it also, and more importantly, is probably those weeks leading up to it, like that foundation that you built over the last couple of weeks. Like, how does that translate into the performance you had? Or conversely, if you had a performance you're not very happy with, like to go back and figure out, like, was there something I did in training? You know, like maybe if you had a really bad round on Sunday, like maybe doing 2 jump schools Friday and Thursday was a bad idea, or whatever it may be, right? So I think that that's one thing. And then the other thing, like, I'm a biomechanist by training, that's kind of my thing. But I think it's incredibly valuable to like really spend time studying how your horse moves, whether you're a dressage rider, eventing, Western, jumping, whatever it may be. So the video that showed the 2 horses side by side, that's a free platform that anyone can download. It's called Canovia, and it not only allows you to play 2 videos side by side, it allows you to go frame by frame. You can calculate angles. You can calculate pretty much any like mechanical value you need, and just really learn how your horse moves. So I think if you put the foundational time in, then it allows you down the road to quickly identify a problem. So for me, if I'm trying to like really understand how a horse moves, like, it's not uncommon for me at all to sit there one evening and to spend 30 minutes watching one jump, and to play it forward and reverse it back, and to play it forward at this speed and reverse it back, and to start looking at the left front, like how does it use that leg, and then the right front, the left hind, and then to try to put it all together in your mind. Because I think if you do that homework, and it's something that is accessible to everyone to do that, then later down the road, like when you really truly understand how your horse moves, then as you're riding it, or if something happens, like almost instantaneously, you'll be able to detect it. Versus if you don't have that good foundation for how a horse moves, then it becomes really, really difficult to detect a change. And that can become a problem if you want to identify a potential injury early. You're probably going to miss it if you don't have that really good foundation.
Right. Good. Sean, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the journal is probably the biggest thing there, and like even in our program too, that's probably the first thing we incorporated, and it's still probably, as far as tools, that's probably the most useful tool we have, you know, because it's easy just to forget stuff, you know, like over the course of a year, right? Especially like little details. So
right. Okay, well, we've got a couple guest questions here, which are great. One is Tim mentioned the emotional aspect and motivation. Is there any research that you are aware of that speaks to supporting their emotional life and best practices for motivation?
Yes, that's a really good question. I would say that, like, is there really robust research in sport horses? Like, probably not. I think that so much of it, and like this is my opinion here, but I think so much of it comes back to allowing them to be horses and to be happy. I think that the closer you keep them to how they naturally probably are in the environment, then and reinforce that, then I think that probably emotionally the happier they would be. I'm a big proponent, and I know Sean is as well, of turnout. And as well, like the programs, like the top programs, like Peter Fredrickson, for example, like he uses group turnout with his Olympic horses and stuff, right? So I think that we're looking for situations where you put the horse in the best environment. I think that's all very important, but it really is just, I think at the end of the day, like, and this is where horsemanship is so important, right? Like being able to read a horse and to understand what makes it happy. And then once you determine that, and this is a little bit what you talked about at the very start, Kim, with the lighting the fire, like once the horse is happy and a little bit of that fire is lit, then your job as the trainer is to pour kerosene on it, right? Like throw everything at it to make it happy to do its job. And I think like you're really doing well in that situation. So it's like me personally, I think they try to put them in environments that are very natural for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you find like the horse is really happy and kind of flourishing, then just double down on that and anything you can do to make the horse happy. Because at the end of the day, if there's no emotional motivation to do something, then you can have the best training program in the world and the horse will always underperform and not reach its potential.
Great. Sean?
Yeah, I think that's something that probably is worth stressing. Like at the end of the day, it's like in my experience riding show jumping horses, the very best ones always they always have a real palpable love for show jumping,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And you can't really that's something it's hard to put into them if they don't really love it. But I think there's a lot of horses that do genuinely get a real kick out of it, you know. So I think a big part of it is just making sure that you preserve that love for what they're doing and their sport and everything, and making sure it's really worth their time and worth their while, you know.
Great. All right, we've got another related question, which is everybody's training program is different, but similarly, how much variety of conditioning do you feel is necessary in the horse's training program? So many want to just do the same thing. So the question is about variety.
Yeah, I think variety is critical, especially with horses. And I think it can almost come back to that battery thing a little bit. And like I talked about a physiological battery, but you can break that down. Like there's more like are you really going to try to tax like the endurance side of things one day, and then you can do more like strength the next day, and then power and so on. So I think horses can work like 5 days a week pretty comfortably, maybe 6, but you do need to rotate through. I definitely understand what the question is getting to a little bit, though, where like so many programs are 6 days a week because they're 6 days a week and there isn't a lot of rationale. And then Monday's a day off because Monday's just a day off. So it really comes down to really looking at your program and making sure you're not draining those batteries. Because I think that there's nothing worse you can do for an athlete than do the same thing 6 days in a row. Like it's again, like coming back to injury risk, it's just such a huge red flag that like in those situations, I'd always be surprised if an athlete wouldn't eventually become injured sooner rather than later. So it really does need to be like have some harder work days, some recovery days, and just don't get stuck into that trap of every day is the exact same. It's a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah, there's a ton to say on that subject. Like I always think it too, like the very, very best athletes of all time. Like when I think of like Michael Jordan or Wayne Gretzky, like these guys were obviously really good in their respective sports, but they were also like just really good athletes, and they did a lot of other sports too. Like Michael Jordan played a ton of baseball too, and I know Gretzky played baseball, and like, you know, and I think that's a trend among a lot of like top athletes in human sports, not, you know, hyper focusing maybe so much. And I think that's another thing, like as far as the whole 6 day a week thing, like it makes sense in that it's kind of built around the show week, and where you're never going to show on Monday, and then you are going to show probably Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But again, yeah, like how much of that can you do all year round, like never stopping before your horse just decides he's kind of done with it? Because I think a lot of riders and trainers are very industrious and they want to work really hard. And I know this is me when I was experimenting with the 5 day week thing. I would kind of sit down and think like, I feel kind of bad not working, not riding on this Friday, right? Like it feels like I'm slacking. But I think, you know, burnout's real, right? Especially near the end of the year, and especially if you've been jumping a lot, right? So I think just getting the horse out for some, even if it's just like hacks and doing something completely different, right, with the horse, or, you know, going out in the field and going out for like a 2-hour ride, or just a ham walk somewhere too, right? Like I think just doing different stuff and keeping it, you know, keeping the horse kind of engaged and not just coming out and doing the same thing every single day over and over. I think the mental burnout on the horse's part is hard too.
And I think you probably just answered a question from a guest, which is, how do you explain the re-injury rates in human sport is 30%, and horses it's closer to 70%? Would it be overuse related, or?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that I think like one of the challenges, it's so hard to rehabilitate a horse. Like that's one thing that I think really probably reflects in in that number. I think as well, like in terms of giving horses like a lot of time, like stall rest, I think that's another issue. A lot of times it needs to be done, but it creates so many other injuries. And I think as well, on the human side, it is a lot easier to change the movement mechanics than it can be with horses. So a lot of times if a human athlete is injured, like if it's an ACL injury, like a non-contact ACL, like they'll go through a program to change that movement so that it's less likely to re-injure in the future, versus a lot of times horses, we kind of bring them back and then there's never that real intervention to say, maybe like the way the horse was moving its body before, put the deep digital into a bad position and we're going to target that next time. So yeah, it's a multifactorial question with not a really good answer, at least not from my side.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer either. Probably, I think a big struggle with horse sport is you don't have a clear line of communication with your athlete, right? Like you can't just ask him, hey, like, how you feeling a little bit like sore, like be honest, like how's this feeling? It's like, yeah, like, I'm feeling a little bit like on my left front, but like right here, it's like, okay, like let's target that pretty aggressively with some rehab and give you some extra days. Because I think especially horses that really like jumping too, like they just power right through it. They won't let you know sometimes, right? Until that gets painful enough that they maybe start overcompensating and then going on like a left side, and then you're kind of sitting there and you're looking at the horse's gait and it's like something feels kind of funny, but I'm not quite sure where it's coming from. And then yeah, the whole diagnostics it can get really complicated with a horse that is not willing to tell you if he's hurting or not.
Right. All right. Well, we're getting to the close of our time, so I'm going to jump and say, as the last question, like, what research are you guys aware of that you're most excited about? I'm guessing it would be at the top end of the sport, but that would have applications very broadly to us regular riders.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that a little bit similar to like the Move Pro that Sean talked about, like for a long time, like the big barrier to learning a lot about how horses move was just that the technology was so expensive. But as a lot of this technology becomes cheaper and cheaper, I think it will be easier in the future to implement some wearables on your horses, even something that stays with them 24/7. So maybe something on a halter or just a piece of fabric that's close to the body that will allow you to really have to track like potentially like how the horse is feeling, how did it sleep last night. Like I think that is all very interesting because it creates a much better picture of what is actually going on with your horse as opposed to just the snapshot you can get when you show up to the barn and maybe spend 2 hours there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of the research that's going into, the takeoff angles and being able to measure that in real time, and the force generated on takeoff and on landing, all that stuff, obviously it has very practical uses for riders, but I think just the sport in general, when you're watching it on TV or you're tuning in, right, it can be really difficult to parse out like why a horse had a rail, even for like really, really seasoned professionals, like sometimes, and you end up hearing a lot like, it's just an unlucky rail, like a lot on broadcasting. So I would hope too that this kind of technology kind of finds its way into the broadcasting side of it too, so that maybe when we're watching on TV or we're watching other big rounds, we can kind of get more information from especially these really, really top horses that aren't as accessible.
Right. That's a great point. Brendan, I think we're there. Thank you guys so much. That I think we should have booked 2 hours, but we didn't. So
yeah, it was incredibly engaging. It was I think a lot of people had some great questions and ongoing questions. There were several people that wrote multiple times in the Q&A. And if we didn't get to your question, there's still quite a list. We will email you back directly to help guide you with your journey here. I know we had a lot of questions about what the devices that you use, Sean, and we did respond to everyone inquiring. And Tim, a lot of questions about your research. So there's nothing better than finishing strong on an hour with a lot of questions directed at everyone involved. And Kim, thank you for your time and insight around Haygain and the support you give with Sean. So to keep us on track and to finish everything off on time, I just want to thank all the viewers for spending their afternoon with us. We did reach a total of 78 guests joining us for lunch, which is a great number to have. Again, thank you so much to our guests, Sean and Tim, for your time and expertise today. It does sound like we should probably do another one of these to really continue on with the conversation. And of course, to our partners at Haygain, Kim, incredible questions. B and Gina, who you're not seeing but are behind the scenes and a part of the Haygain team, thank you for your support of the Ontario Equestrian community. As a reminder to all OE members that are joining us, Haygain is offering 5% discount on Haygain steamers and their new forager. So if you're interested in purchasing any of those products, please reach out to the OE office and we'll give you that discount code. Again, the webinar recording from today will be released tomorrow on OE's social channels. So please feel free to share that link and rewatch it, because there's a lot of information that was thrown out today that I'm sure we'll all benefit from watching again. And thank you everyone again for joining us. We appreciate your time and we hope you have a great rest of your week. So thank you everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks for putting this on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Bye guys.
Bye.